Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison had seen plenty of unexpected situations during his 15 years with the Navy SEALs, but nothing quite like what happened that Tuesday morning at Naval Base Coronado. He was conducting a routine inspection of new recruits when a young woman approached the security checkpoint, asking to speak with someone in charge about her brother who had gone missing during a classified operation 6 months earlier. The base security officer, Sergeant Mills, was about to turn her away with the standard response about classified information when something caught Jake's attention. The woman, who appeared to be in her mid-20s with determined brown eyes and shoulder-length dark hair, wasn't crying or pleading like most family members who came seeking answers. Instead, she stood with perfect military posture, her hands positioned in a way that made Jake's blood run cold. Her fingers were arranged in a specific pattern against her leg. 3 fingers extended, 2 tucked under, with her thumb positioned at a precise angle. It was a silent communication signal that Jake had only seen used by the most elite special operations units. The signal meant friendly contact in hostile territory and was supposed to be known only to a select few within the Special Forces community. Jake's mind raced as he observed her from a distance. The signal was so subtle that anyone without extensive special operations training would miss it entirely. She wasn't making it obviously or dramatically. It appeared natural, as if she was simply resting her hand against her leg while waiting. But Jake knew better. That particular hand configuration was taught only in the most classified training programs, and even then, only to personnel with the highest security clearances. He approached the checkpoint slowly, his training kicking in as he assessed the situation. The woman noticed his approach and maintained eye contact without breaking her posture. There was something familiar about her face, though Jake couldn't immediately place where he might have seen her before. Her clothing was civilian, a simple blue blouse and dark jeans, but she wore sturdy hiking boots that suggested someone accustomed to rough terrain. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Commander Morrison," Jake said, keeping his voice neutral. "I understand you're here about your brother." "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "My brother is Petty Officer 2nd Class David Chen. He was deployed 6 months ago on what I was told was a training exercise in South America. The family hasn't heard from him since, and the official reports keep changing." Jake nodded, but his attention remained focused on her hands. She had shifted position slightly, but the signal remained consistent. It was impossible for a civilian to know that signal, let alone execute it so naturally. His suspicions deepened when he noticed a small scar on her left wrist, the kind of mark that came from repelling accidents. Something he'd seen on countless Special Forces personnel over the years. "I'm sorry, but information about ongoing operations is classified," Jake began, following standard protocol. "However, if you'd like to speak privately, we might be able to discuss what limited information can be shared with family members." The woman's expression didn't change, but Jake caught the slightest nod of acknowledgement. She understood the coded invitation to continue their conversation in a more secure setting. This level of operational awareness was not something taught in civilian life. "I would appreciate that opportunity, Commander," she said. "I have some additional information that might be relevant to your ongoing efforts to locate my brother and his unit." The phrase "ongoing efforts" struck Jake as significant. Most family members would say search or investigation, but ongoing efforts was terminology used in military briefings. Combined with her hand signals and overall demeanor, Jake was beginning to suspect that David Chen's sister was far more than she appeared to be. He gestured toward the main building. "Please follow me. We'll need to go through standard security procedures first." As they walked, Jake observed her movement patterns. She maintained perfect situational awareness, automatically positioning herself to have clear sightlines to exits and potential cover points. Her gait was measured and silent, the walk of someone trained in stealth movement. When they passed other personnel, she gave respectful nods but kept her eyes moving, cataloging faces and positions in a way that suggested advanced surveillance training. The security checkpoint required her to surrender any personal items and walk through a metal detector. She complied without hesitation, producing a standard civilian driver's license, credit cards, and a smartphone. Nothing unusual, except Jake noticed. The phone case had subtle wear patterns consistent with tactical equipment, the kind of specialized protective cases used by personnel who worked in harsh field conditions. Once they were seated in a small conference room, Jake decided to test his growing suspicions. Before we begin, I want to make sure I understand your situation correctly. You mentioned your brother was on a training exercise? That's what I was told initially, she replied. But subsequent communications from his command suggested the situation had become more complex. I believe the term used was extended operational deployment. Jake leaned back in his chair. Civilians didn't casually use phrases like extended operational deployment. That was specific military jargon used to describe missions that had exceeded their planned duration due to changing circumstances on the ground. Ms. Chen, I have to ask, do you have any military background yourself? For the first time since their conversation began, she hesitated. It was brief, barely a second, but Jake caught it. She was calculating her response, weighing what information to reveal. I work in government consulting, she said finally. My work sometimes requires familiarity with military terminology and procedures. It was a carefully worded non-answer that neither confirmed nor denied military experience. Jake recognized the technique. He'd used similar responses himself when operating undercover. The fact that she knew to deflect rather than lie outright suggested professional training in maintaining operational security. The room fell silent as Jake processed what he was observing. Every instinct he'd developed over 15 years of special operations was telling him that the woman sitting across from him was not just David Chen's concerned sister. She was someone with extensive special forces training, someone who understood classified hand signals, operational terminology, and security procedures at a level that suggested active or recent military service in highly classified units. But if that was true, it raised even more questions. Why was she approaching through civilian channels rather than military ones? What was her real connection to David Chen's mission? And most importantly, what did she know about what had happened to his unit in South America? Jake decided to take a more direct approach. He leaned forward and placed his hands on the table in a specific configuration, a counter signal used to test whether someone was truly familiar with special operations protocols. If she was really just a civilian, she would ignore it. If she had the training he suspected, she would respond appropriately. Without missing a beat, she adjusted her posture and touched her collar in a subtle movement that confirmed she understood his test. The gesture meant secure communication acknowledged. Jake felt a mixture of relief and concern. His instincts had been correct, but this revelation opened up entirely new questions about who she really was and what her true mission might be. I think we need to start this conversation over, Jake said quietly. And this time, let's skip the cover story about being just David Chen's sister. She studied his face for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. My name is Captain Sarah Chen, United States Army Special Forces. David Chen is my brother, but that's not the only reason I'm here. Jake nodded slowly. Army Special Forces. That explained her knowledge of the hand signals and her operational awareness. But it raised new questions about why she was approaching a Navy SEAL commander through unofficial channels, rather than going through proper military protocols. Go on, Jake said. 6 months ago, my brother's SEAL team was inserted into Colombia as part of a joint operation with my unit. The mission was to locate and extract a high-value asset who had intelligence about drug cartel operations that were funding terrorist activities in the region. It was supposed to be a simple in-and-out operation, completed within 72 hours. Sarah paused and glanced toward the door, a habit that Jake recognized from his own experience in discussing sensitive operations. Even in a secure facility, operational security remained a constant concern. What went wrong? Jake asked. Everything, Sarah replied. The intelligence was bad from the start. The asset wasn't where he was supposed to be. The location was compromised, and both teams walked into what can only be described as a carefully planned ambush. My team was able to extract under heavy fire, but David's team was cut off and had to go to ground in hostile territory. Jake understood the implications immediately. A SEAL team cut off in enemy territory would activate survival, evasion, resistance, and escape protocols. They would move to predetermined rally points and attempt to establish communication with command through secure channels. The fact that there had been no contact for 6 months suggested either their communications equipment had been compromised or something much worse had happened. What's the official status of your brother's team? Jake asked. Missing in action, presumed captured, Sarah said, her voice remaining steady despite the personal nature of the information. but I have reason to believe they're still alive and operating in the area. What kind of reason? Sarah reached into her jacket and produced a small electronic device that looked like a standard GPS unit, but had been modified with additional components. This is a modified emergency beacon. 3 weeks ago, it picked up a signal transmission that matched the frequency and encryption pattern used by David's team. The signal lasted only 12 seconds and hasn't been repeated, but the location data places it deep in the Colombian jungle, approximately 200 miles from their last known position. Jake examined the device. The modifications were sophisticated and definitely not standard military issue. Where did you get this equipment? I built it, Sarah said simply. Electronic warfare and communications intelligence are my specialties. When official channels stopped providing useful information about my brother's team, I decided to take a more direct approach to finding them. This revelation added another layer to Jake's understanding of who Sarah Chen really was. Special Forces soldiers were cross-trained in multiple disciplines, but building sophisticated communications intercept equipment suggested capabilities well beyond standard military training. She was either exceptionally skilled or had received additional specialized training from intelligence agencies. You said you approached me through civilian channels rather than military ones. Why? Sarah's expression darkened. Because I have reason to believe there are people within the official chain of command who don't want David's team found. That's a serious accusation. It's based on serious evidence, Sarah replied. The initial mission briefing contained information that proved to be not just wrong, but deliberately misleading. The timing of the ambush suggested someone with access to operational details provided advance warning to hostile forces. And since my brother's team went missing, there have been 3 separate incidents where rescue or recovery operations were either delayed, redirected, or canceled at the last minute. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. If Sarah's suspicions were correct, it meant David Chen's SEAL team hadn't just been the victims of bad luck or poor intelligence. They had been deliberately betrayed by someone within their own command structure. Do you have any idea who might be responsible? I have suspects, but no proof, Sarah admitted. The mission was classified at such a high level that only a handful of people had access to the complete operational details. Narrowing down the list of potential sources for the leaked information is complicated by the fact that multiple agencies were involved: Navy Special Warfare Command, Army Special Operations, CIA, and DEA. The mention of multiple agencies explained why the situation had become so complicated. Joint operations involving different military branches and civilian intelligence agencies often suffered from communication problems and conflicting objectives. But deliberate sabotage was a much more serious concern. What exactly are you asking me to do? Jake asked. I need help getting back into Colombia to locate my brother's team, Sarah said. Official channels have been blocked or compromised, but I believe a small independent operation could succeed, where larger efforts have failed. I have current intelligence about their probable location, specialized equipment for tracking their communications, and the training necessary to operate in hostile territory. Jake understood what she was really asking. She wanted him to help her organize an unofficial rescue mission outside normal command channels. It was exactly the kind of operation that could end both their careers if it went wrong, but might be the only chance David Chen's team had for survival. This is incredibly dangerous territory you're talking about, Jake said. Not just the jungle, but the political and military implications of operating outside official channels. I understand the risks, Sarah replied. But I also understand that my brother and his teammates are running out of time. Every day we wait increases the chances that they'll be discovered and killed, or that they'll die from injuries, disease, or starvation in the jungle. Jake stared out the window at the Pacific Ocean, weighing his options. Everything Sarah had told him rang true, and her knowledge of operational details that weren't publicly available supported her claims about her brother's situation. But agreeing to help would mean risking not just his own career, but potentially violating direct orders and engaging in unauthorized military operations on foreign soil. On the other hand, the SEAL ethos was clear: no one gets left behind. If David Chen's team was still alive and reachable, didn't they deserve every possible effort to bring them home safely? Jake made his decision based on 15 years of experience that had taught him to trust his instincts about people and situations. Sarah Chen was telling the truth, and her brother's SEAL team deserved a chance at rescue, even if it meant operating outside official channels. Before I commit to anything, I need to verify some details, Jake said. Can you provide me with your brother's service record number and the names of his teammates? Sarah immediately rattled off a series of numbers and names that Jake recognized. David Chen was indeed a member of SEAL Team 6, one of the most elite units in the Navy. His teammates included some of the most experienced and capable operators Jake had ever worked with. If this team was still alive in the Colombian jungle, they would be an extremely valuable asset worth significant risk to recover. I'll need 24 hours to make some discreet inquiries and confirm the details of their mission, Jake said. If everything checks out, I might be able to help you, but I want to be clear about what we would be getting into. I understand completely, Sarah replied. This isn't a decision to make lightly. Jake spent the next day making careful phone calls to contacts throughout the special operations community. What he learned confirmed Sarah's story in disturbing detail. David Chen's team had indeed been inserted into Colombia on a joint mission that had gone wrong from the start. Official efforts to locate and recover the team had been hampered by bureaucratic delays, conflicting intelligence reports, and what several sources described as unusual reluctance from higher-level commanders to authorize aggressive search and rescue operations. More troubling was information Jake gathered about the original mission briefing. 3 different sources confirmed that the intelligence used to plan the operation had been provided by a single CIA asset whose reliability had been questioned in previous operations. The decision to proceed with the mission despite these concerns had come from very high levels within the command structure. Jake also learned that Sarah Chen's military record was even more impressive than he had initially suspected. She had completed multiple deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, earning commendations for operations that remained highly classified. Her expertise in communications and electronic warfare had made her a sought-after asset for joint special operations missions. Most importantly, she had a reputation for absolute reliability and sound judgment under pressure. The next morning, Sarah returned to Naval Base Coronado as planned. Jake met her in the same conference room. But this time he had a detailed map of Colombia spread out on the table, along with several folders containing intelligence reports and satellite imagery. I've confirmed your story, Jake said without preamble. Your brother's team is missing. The official rescue efforts have been inadequate, and there are legitimate reasons to suspect the original mission was compromised. I'm willing to help, but we need to establish some ground rules. Sarah nodded, her expression serious but hopeful. First, this operation will be completely unofficial, Jake continued. We can't use any military resources, personnel, or equipment that can be traced back to official channels. Second, we'll be operating with minimal backup support. If things go wrong, we can't count on cavalry coming to rescue us. Third, we need an exit strategy that protects everyone involved if the operation is discovered. Agreed on all points, Sarah said. I've already begun planning for those contingencies. Jake was impressed but not surprised by her preparedness. Show me what you have in mind. Sarah opened her laptop and displayed a detailed operational plan that demonstrated hours of careful research and planning. She had identified 3 possible locations where David's team might be based, using analysis of terrain, water sources, and defensive positions that SEAL teams would naturally gravitate toward. She had also mapped out insertion and extraction routes that would minimize exposure to hostile forces and government surveillance. The biggest challenge will be transportation, Sarah explained. Commercial flights into Colombia are closely monitored, and military aircraft are obviously not an option. I've identified a private charter service that operates flights for oil exploration companies. They're used to flying into remote areas without asking too many questions about their passengers' business. What about equipment? Jake asked. I have access to most of what we'll need through private contractors who work with government agencies. Communications equipment, GPS devices, medical supplies, and survival gear can all be obtained without leaving official footprints. Weapons will be more challenging, but I have contacts in Colombia who can provide what we need once we're on the ground. Jake studied the plan carefully. It was sophisticated and well thought out, but also extremely dangerous. They would be operating in territory controlled by drug cartels with no official support and minimal backup resources. Success would depend entirely on their ability to move undetected through hostile territory, locate a SEAL team that had been missing for 6 months, and extract everyone safely. Timeline? Jake asked. The dry season ends in about 6 weeks, Sarah replied. After that, Weather conditions will make helicopter extraction much more difficult. If we're going to do this, we need to move within the next month. Team composition? Just the two of us, Sarah said. A larger team would be harder to insert undetected and would require more complex logistics. Both of us have the training and experience necessary for this type of operation. Jake appreciated her confidence, but he also understood the limitations of a two-person team. What if your brother's team has casualties who can't move under their own power? Then we'll need to adapt our extraction plan, Sarah admitted. But based on the communications intercept I received, at least some members of the team are mobile and actively trying to establish contact. I believe they're in better condition than official reports suggest. Money? Jake asked, addressing the practical reality of funding an unofficial operation. I can cover initial expenses, Sarah said. Equipment, transportation, and local contacts will require about $50,000. I have access to those funds through personal savings and some family resources. Jake was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the plan and considering all the implications. Sarah waited patiently, understanding that he was weighing not just the operational challenges, but the personal and professional risks they would both be taking. There's one more thing I need to know, Jake said finally. What makes you so certain your brother's team is still alive? 6 months is a long time to survive in hostile territory without resupply or medical support. Sarah's expression grew more personal for the first time since they had begun discussing operational details. David and I grew up in Northern California, spending most of our free time hiking and camping in some of the most remote wilderness areas in the country. Our father was a Marine who taught us both advanced survival skills from the time we were old enough to walk. David once spent 3 weeks alone in the Sierra Nevada mountains with nothing but a knife and basic clothing, just to prove he could do it. She paused and looked directly at Jake. More than that, the communications intercept I received wasn't just a random signal. It contained a personal code that David and I developed as children, a way to let each other know we were okay, even when we couldn't speak directly. No one else knows that code. If someone transmitted it, it was David, and he was alive when he sent it. This personal detail convinced Jake more than all the operational planning and intelligence analysis. The bond between siblings who had served in special forces was something he understood from his own experience. Sarah wasn't just conducting a professional military operation. She was trying to bring her brother home. 2 weeks later, Jake found himself sitting in a small charter aircraft flying over the dense Colombian jungle at dawn. Sarah sat across from him, reviewing satellite images on a ruggedized tablet while monitoring communications frequencies through equipment that looked like standard hiking gear, but was actually sophisticated surveillance technology. Their insertion into Colombia had gone smoothly thanks to Sarah's careful planning. They had entered the country as private security consultants hired by a legitimate oil exploration company to assess remote drilling sites. Their equipment had been shipped separately through a private contractor who specialized in providing gear for dangerous overseas assignments. The cover story would hold up to casual inspection but wouldn't survive detailed investigation by Colombian intelligence services. We're about 20 minutes from the drop zone, the pilot announced over the intercom. He was a former military aviator who specialized in flights for clients who needed to reach remote locations without attracting government attention. Sarah had paid him enough to ensure his complete discretion about their mission. Jake checked his equipment one final time. They were traveling light, each carrying only essential gear in military-style backpacks that could sustain them for up to 2 weeks in the jungle. Communications equipment, medical supplies, water purification tablets, emergency rations, and basic survival tools were distributed between their packs to ensure redundancy in case one was lost or damaged. The most critical item was Sarah's modified communications intercept device. She had upgraded it during their 2 weeks of preparation, adding more sensitive receivers and expanded battery capacity. If David's team was still alive and attempting to establish contact, this equipment would give them the best chance of detecting and locating the signals. Landing zone coming up, the pilot announced. Jake looked out the window at a small clearing that had been carved out of the jungle for a logging operation that had been abandoned years earlier. The site was remote enough to provide concealment, but large enough for the aircraft to land and take off safely. According to their intelligence, it was also far enough from cartel operations to minimize the risk of immediate detection. The aircraft touched down on the rough dirt strip, and Jake felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with beginning a dangerous mission. He and Sarah grabbed their gear and moved quickly toward the tree line, while the pilot kept the engines running. Within 3 minutes of landing, they were concealed in the dense jungle vegetation and the aircraft was climbing back toward cruising altitude. Phase 1 complete, Sarah said quietly, activating a GPS device to confirm their exact position. We're approximately 40 miles northeast of the last confirmed location of David's team. They spent the first day moving carefully through the jungle, following animal trails and stream beds to avoid leaving obvious tracks while making steady progress toward their target area. Sarah's navigation skills were excellent, and she maintained a pace that covered significant ground without exhausting their energy reserves. Jake was impressed by her fieldcraft. She moved through the dense vegetation with minimal noise, automatically identified potential hazards like dangerous insects and unstable terrain, and maintained constant awareness of their tactical situation. Her Army Special Forces training was evident in every aspect of her performance. By late afternoon, they had covered nearly 15 miles and were approaching the first area where David's team might have established a base camp. Sarah set up her communications equipment while Jake established a defensive perimeter and prepared a cold camp that would be invisible to aerial surveillance. "Anything?" Jake asked as Sarah adjusted frequencies and signal filters on her devices. "Not yet, but we're still outside the effective range for low-power transmissions," Sarah replied. "If they're using emergency radios with limited battery power, we'll need to get within 5 miles before we can detect anything." They continued their approach the next morning, moving in a zigzag pattern that allowed them to systematically search the most likely areas for signs of SEAL team activity. Jake's experience told him what to look for: carefully concealed observation posts, water sources that had been modified for easier access, and defensive positions that would provide good fields of fire while remaining hidden from casual observation. Around midday, they found their first evidence that David's team had passed through the area. Sarah spotted it first: a small piece of fabric tied around a tree, branch in a pattern that meant nothing to casual observers but would be instantly recognizable to other military personnel as a trail marker. "That's David's work," Sarah confirmed after examining the marker closely. "He uses that particular knot pattern as a personal signature. This marker is probably 3 or 4 months old based on weather exposure, but it confirms they came through this area and were headed northwest." They adjusted their route based on this new information and continued moving deeper into the jungle. The terrain was becoming more challenging, with steep ridges and dense undergrowth that slowed their progress, but also provided better concealment from potential hostile forces. Late in the afternoon of their third day, Sarah's communications equipment picked up a faint signal transmission that lasted only a few seconds. She immediately began recording and analyzing the signal while Jake established security around their position. "It's encrypted using military frequencies," Sarah reported after several minutes of analysis. "The encryption pattern is consistent with SEAL team protocols, but the signal is too weak and brief for me to determine the exact location or content of the transmission." "Distance?" Jake asked. "Less than 10 miles, probably closer to 5, Sarah replied. "If we continue on our current heading, we should be able to get a better fix on the signal source by tomorrow evening." They pressed forward with renewed urgency, knowing that any communications from David's team probably indicated either an emergency situation or an attempt to coordinate with potential rescue forces. Jake felt the familiar tension that came with approaching a potentially dangerous contact situation. The next morning brought both good news and complications. Sarah's equipment detected another signal transmission, this one strong enough to provide a rough bearing toward the source. However, they also encountered signs of recent cartel activity in the area: vehicle tracks on jungle trails, abandoned campsites, and evidence of drug processing operations. "We're moving into contested territory," Jake observed as they studied the intelligence from a concealed observation point. "If David's team is operating in this area, they're dealing with a lot more than just survival in the jungle. That might explain why they've been so careful about communications," Sarah replied. "If there are hostile forces actively patrolling this area, they'd have to limit radio transmissions to absolute emergencies to avoid detection. They modified their approach, moving with even greater caution, and spending more time in observation before advancing to new positions." Jake's combat experience told him they were approaching a situation where contact with either friendly or hostile forces could happen at any moment. As the sun began to set on their fourth day in the jungle, Sarah's equipment detected the strongest signal yet. A transmission that lasted nearly 30 seconds and included digital components that suggested sophisticated communications equipment rather than basic emergency radios. That's definitely military-grade communications, Sarah confirmed as she analyzed the intercepted transmission. The signal strength puts the source within 2 miles of our current position. Jake studied the terrain ahead through binoculars, looking for likely positions where a SEAL team might establish a semi-permanent base camp. The area included several defensible ridges with good observation of surrounding approaches, access to fresh water, and natural concealment from aerial surveillance. "Tomorrow we make contact," Jake said quietly. "One way or another, we're going to find out what happened to your brother's team." Jake woke before dawn on their 5th day in the Colombian jungle, his senses immediately alert to the sounds and smells of the dense forest around them. Sarah was already awake, quietly monitoring her communications equipment for any signals from her brother's team. The morning mist created an ethereal atmosphere that would provide excellent concealment for their final approach. "Anything overnight?" Jake whispered. "One brief transmission around 3 in the morning, Sarah replied softly. "Same encryption pattern, but I managed to extract a few words of clear text. Someone transmitted Rally Point Charlie and what sounded like a medical status report. This information confirmed that David's team was not only alive but maintaining military discipline and procedures despite months of isolation in hostile territory. Rally Point Charlie would be a predetermined location where team members could regroup if they became separated during operations. They broke camp methodically, leaving no trace of their presence while preparing for what could be a complex contact situation. Jake's experience told him that approaching an isolated special forces team required extreme caution. They would be highly alert to potential threats and might react defensively to unexpected contact. "We need to establish our identity before we get within weapons range," Jake said as they reviewed their approach plan. "If your brother's team has been avoiding contact for 6 months, they're going to be very suspicious of anyone who manages to find them." Sarah nodded and showed Jake a small electronic device. "This transmits on the emergency frequency David's team would be monitoring. It can send the personal identification code that only David would recognize. If we get close enough to make contact, I can use this to let him know it's me before we reveal our position." They spent the morning moving carefully through increasingly challenging terrain, following ridge lines that provided good observation of the surrounding area while staying concealed from potential hostile forces below. Jake's experience in similar environments told him they were approaching the type of location where a SEAL team would establish a defensive position. Around midday, they reached a vantage point that overlooked a valley with steep sides and multiple water sources, exactly the type of terrain that Special Forces teams preferred for long-term survival situations. Sarah set up her most sensitive listening equipment, while Jake used powerful binoculars to scan the area for any signs of human activity. "There," Sarah said quietly after several minutes of patient observation. "About 200 meters northwest of the largest stream. Do you see that cluster of rocks near the tree line?" Jake adjusted his binoculars and focused on the area Sarah had indicated. At first he saw nothing unusual, but gradually he began to notice subtle signs that the natural landscape had been modified. Rocks had been arranged to provide firing positions while appearing random to casual observation. Vegetation had been cleared in specific patterns that would provide clear fields of fire, while maintaining camouflage from above. "That's definitely a military position," Jake confirmed. "Whoever built that knew what they were doing." Sarah activated her personal identification transmitter and sent a brief coded message that would identify her to David, without alerting anyone else who might be monitoring communications in the area. They waited in tense silence for several minutes before her equipment detected a response. The return signal was brief but clear, a coded acknowledgement that included personal references. Only David Chen would know. Sarah's eyes filled with tears of relief as she realized her brother was not only alive, but close enough to communicate directly. "He's alive," she whispered to Jake. "And he says there are 4 members of his original 6-man team still operational." This was better news than they had dared hope for. 4 surviving SEALs represented a significant combat capability, even after months of survival in hostile territory. However, it also meant their extraction would be more complex than originally planned. The next phase of their approach required extreme caution. David's team would be maintaining security protocols that included armed sentries and defensive positions designed to repel attacks by numerically superior forces. Jake and Sarah needed to make contact without triggering defensive reactions that could result in friendly fire. Incidents that Sarah transmitted their approximate location and requested a secure meeting at a neutral position away from the main defensive perimeter. The response came within minutes. Coordinates for a meeting point about half a mile from their current position, along with specific approach instructions that would allow David's security team to identify them as friendly contacts. Following the prescribed route, Jake and Sarah made their way carefully through dense undergrowth toward the designated meeting point. Jake's tactical awareness was heightened to maximum levels. Knowing they were approaching armed and extremely alert Special Forces personnel who had been surviving in hostile territory for months, they reached the meeting point, a easy, small clearing beside a stream, and took positions that provided good observation while remaining concealed. Within minutes, Jake spotted movement in the tree line across the clearing. A figure emerged from the vegetation with the fluid, silent movement that marked an experienced Special Forces operator. Even after 6 months in the jungle, David Chen was immediately recognizable as Sarah's brother. He had lost significant weight, and his clothing showed the wear of extended field operations, but his bearing and tactical awareness demonstrated that he remained an effective combat operator. He carried an assault rifle with modifications that suggested extensive field use and maintenance. The reunion between David and Sarah was emotional but brief, conducted in whispers that wouldn't carry beyond the immediate area. Jake watched the perimeter while the siblings exchanged critical information about their respective situations. "We've been evading cartel forces and corrupt Colombian military units for months," David reported. "The original mission intelligence was completely wrong. We walked into a trap that someone had advance warning about. Since then, we've been conducting reconnaissance on drug operations, while trying to find a way to extract without compromising our operational security." This confirmed Sarah's suspicions about deliberate sabotage of the original mission. Someone within the command structure had provided information that led David's team into an ambush, then prevented effective rescue operations that might have discovered evidence of the betrayal. "Current team status?" Jake asked. 4 operational members including myself," David replied. 2 casualties. 1 killed in the initial ambush, 1 died from infections 3 months ago. We've been living off the land and conducting limited harassment operations against cartel facilities when opportunities presented themselves. Equipment and supplies? We've been resupplying from captured cartel weapons and equipment. Medical supplies are critically low, but we've managed to stay healthy through careful field hygiene and local medicinal plants. Communications equipment is functional, but we've been limiting transmissions to avoid detection. Jake processed this information quickly. David's team was in better condition than official reports suggested, but they had been operating under extreme stress for an extended period. Extracting 4 people through hostile territory would require careful planning and possibly external support. "Extraction options?" Jake asked. David looked at Jake with the calculating expression of someone who had been planning for this moment for months. "We've identified 3 possible extraction routes, but all of them require getting past cartel checkpoints and avoiding Colombian military patrols that we believe are compromised. The safest option involves a 40-mile movement to an abandoned airstrip that could handle small aircraft." Jake studied the terrain features David described, weighing the challenges against their available resources. Moving 6 people through 40 miles of hostile territory would normally require significant support assets and multiple contingency plans. With just the equipment they had brought, success would depend on avoiding contact rather than fighting their way through opposition forces. "Timeline constraints?" Jake asked. "We need to move within the next week," David replied. "Cartel activity in this area has been increasing, and we've intercepted communications suggesting they're planning a major sweep operation to locate what they believe is a Colombian military reconnaissance team operating in their territory." Sarah showed David the extraction plan she and Jake had developed, including the arrangements for charter aircraft and the cover story that would allow them to leave Colombia without attracting official attention. David reviewed the plan carefully, suggesting modifications based on his team's 6 months of experience operating in the local area. The biggest challenge will be the first 20 miles, David explained. That's where cartel security is heaviest, and they've established checkpoints on all the main trails. We'll need to move through areas that are difficult to patrol but that also slow our progress significantly. The three of them spent the next hour developing a detailed movement plan that would get all 6 team members to the extraction point while minimizing their exposure to hostile forces. The route would take them through some of the most challenging terrain in the region, but it offered the best chance of avoiding contact with cartel patrols. "What about the other 3 members of your team?" Jake asked. "They're maintaining security at our base camp about 2 miles from here," David replied. "All of them are eager to get home, but they're also professional enough to understand the risks involved in this extraction attempt." David led Jake and Sarah back through the jungle to meet the rest of his team. The route took them past carefully concealed observation posts and through defensive positions that demonstrated the SEALs had used their time well to create a secure base of operations. Jake was impressed by the sophistication of their setup, which included camouflaged shelters, water collection systems, and communication equipment that had been improvised from captured cartel electronics. The other 3 team members, Petty Officers Rodriguez, Thompson, and Williams, were exactly what Jake expected from elite SEAL operators. Despite months of hardship, they maintained military bearing and operational discipline. Their equipment showed creative field modifications, and their knowledge of local conditions was extensive. "Commander Morrison," Rodriguez said as David made introductions, "we've heard about you from David's stories. It's an honor to have you here, sir, but I have to ask, what's the real situation with command back home? We've been getting conflicting signals about search and rescue efforts." Jake decided these men deserved the truth about what Sarah had discovered. "There's evidence that your original mission was compromised by someone within the command structure. Official rescue efforts have been deliberately hindered to prevent discovery of that betrayal. This extraction is completely unofficial. If we succeed, there will be questions about why it took 6 months for anyone to find you." The team absorbed this information with the stoic acceptance that Jake had seen from Special Forces personnel when they learned about bureaucratic failures that endangered their lives. They were more concerned with practical matters than political implications. "What's our timeline for movement?" Thompson asked. "We start tomorrow at dawn," David replied. "The extraction aircraft will be in position at the abandoned airstrip in 5 days. That gives us 4 days to cover 40 miles through hostile territory. Doable if we don't encounter significant opposition." They spent the evening conducting detailed planning for the extraction movement. Each team member contributed intelligence about cartel patrol patterns, terrain obstacles, and potential rally points if the group became separated during movement. Jake was struck by how thoroughly they had studied their operational environment during months of forced isolation. Sarah's communications equipment proved invaluable for coordinating their departure. She was able to monitor cartel radio frequencies and identify patrol schedules that would allow them to move through contested areas when hostile forces were least likely to detect them. The movement began before sunrise, with the team spread out in a tactical formation that provided security while maintaining visual contact between team members. David's knowledge of local terrain allowed them to avoid well-traveled routes while making steady progress toward their objective. The first day of movement went smoothly, with the team covering nearly 15 miles without encountering hostile forces. They established a concealed camp in dense vegetation near a water source and settled in for a few hours of rest before continuing their journey. On the second day, they encountered their first serious challenge. A cartel patrol had established a temporary checkpoint on the route they needed to traverse, forcing them to take a lengthy detour through swampy terrain that slowed their progress significantly. By evening, they were behind schedule and would need to make up time on the following day. The third day brought both good and bad news. Sarah's communications intercepts indicated that cartel forces were focusing their search efforts in an area several miles south of their actual route, suggesting their movements had not been detected. However, weather conditions were deteriorating, with heavy rains that would make the final day of movement more difficult. On the fourth day, they faced their most dangerous situation. A large cartel patrol was conducting a sweep operation directly across their planned route to the extraction point. David's team spent 6 hours in concealment while armed men passed within 100 meters of their position. Jake held his breath as voices and radio chatter indicated the patrol was conducting a thorough search of the area. By late afternoon, the patrol had moved on, but precious time had been lost. They would need to cover the final 12 miles to the extraction point in darkness, navigating challenging terrain while maintaining noise discipline that would prevent detection by any remaining hostile forces. The night movement was one of the most difficult operations Jake had experienced in 15 years of Special Forces service. Dense vegetation, steep terrain, and the constant threat of enemy contact made every step a calculated risk. Sarah's navigation skills and David's knowledge of local conditions were essential for maintaining their course while avoiding detection. As dawn approached on the 5th day, they reached the abandoned airstrip, where their extraction aircraft was scheduled to meet them. The runway was overgrown with vegetation and showed signs of years of neglect, but it was still usable for the small charter aircraft that would carry them back to safety. Right on schedule, they heard the sound of aircraft engines approaching from the north. Jake activated an infrared beacon that would identify their location to the pilot while remaining invisible to anyone without night vision equipment. Within minutes, the charter aircraft touched down on the rough runway and taxied toward their position. The extraction itself took less than 5 minutes. David's team moved quickly to board the aircraft while Jake and Sarah provided security. As the aircraft lifted off and climbed toward cruising altitude, Jake felt the relief that came with successful completion of a dangerous mission. But he also knew their challenges were far from over. They still needed to get David's team safely back to the United States, conduct debriefings that would expose the betrayal that had led to their predicament, and deal with the political implications of an unauthorized rescue operation in foreign territory. David, Chen looked out the aircraft window at the Colombian jungle falling away below them, and spoke for the first time since boarding. "Commander, I don't know how to thank you and Sarah for what you've done. We had almost given up hope that anyone was looking for us." Jake smiled and clasped David's shoulder. "That's what the Brotherhood is about. No one gets left behind, regardless of what the bureaucrats decide." As the aircraft flew north toward home, Jake reflected on how a simple hand signal had led to one of the most complex and dangerous operations of his career. Sarah's determination to find her brother had not only saved 4 lives, but had also exposed a betrayal that could have endangered other Special Forces operations. The real work would begin when they reached the United States and had to explain how an unofficial rescue operation had succeeded where months of official efforts had failed. But for now, Jake was content to watch the sunrise and know that David Chen's long ordeal in the Colombian jungle was finally over.